Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Spar and Brawl. I hope you're having a decent day. As always, I'm joined by my co-host Sam, but today we have the absolute pleasure of being joined by RJ Eskow. So, Richard, thank you very much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you. And of course, Richard needs an introduction. He's a writer, he's a political commentator, he's the host of the Zero Hour with RJ Eskow, but he's also a public advisor, and he also worked on the 2016 Bernie campaign as the lead writer and editor. So I'm really looking forward to asking you about that magical moment that really seems to be far, far away now. So looking forward to that. But okay, timestamps down below, and please like and subscribe. So Richard, the first question I really wanted to ask you is, if you were to think about now, really today, the past year or so, maybe let's say, and if you were to compare it, to the previous decades, go back to the 90s, 80s, whenever you like, what comes to your mind? Is anything really special about the contemporary political and social landscape? Is it very different than what we've seen before, or are we just, of course, things have changed, but it's not exceptionally or significantly different?
Well, there's a tremendous mood of pessimism now. I mean, I think a lot of people would agree with that. But pessimism, in my mind right now, that's the pessimism is darker. The contrasts are greater. The pessimism is darker, but the opportunities and the sense for possibility to me is much greater than it's been for decades. If I look back at, I was young during the 1960s, for example, but I remember the 1960s, and I remember this. My brother was older, and he was involved in the student movements then, left-wing protests and so on. So I remember them, meeting, Abby Hoffman or whomever, and seeing those massive demonstrations of 1967, 1968, that kind of thing, watching television when Bobby Kennedy was assassinated, Martin Luther King, those kinds of things. So I deeply remember the sense of hope and possibility, and culturally, the Beatles at Shea Stadium on my 13th birthday, and a sense of possibility, but also the constant fear of nuclear war and divisions within society, and then what seemed like 20 years of anesthesia and just, well, okay, now everybody goes back to work and that kind of thing. I mean, obviously, I'm greatly oversimplifying. And I think that to a certain extent, we saw, first of all, the Iraq War and the strong sense of resistance to that, but nobody knew where to focus or direct that. Here in the United States, there was a sense of hope and excitement around the campaign of Barack Obama, but that quickly turned to disappointment. We had the financial crisis globally, of course. But to me, things started to shift first with the Occupy movement, which developed tremendous worldwide support across the political spectrum until people, the elites started really unifying against it. But it laid the groundwork for some other things, including the Bernie campaign of 2016. You mentioned that I worked for Bernie. I was employee number 5, I think, on the Bernie campaign. And a lot of people said to me when I went to work for Bernie that I was out of my mind, that the think tank where I worked, they said, well, progressive think tank, but they said, well, we'll hold your job for you because, I started with Bernie in April of 2015, and they said, well, okay, you'll be back in June, that kind of thing. We'll hold your seat. And of course, I said, I don't know. I think that there's something here. Even Bernie himself said to me when he hired me, he said, let's be candid, Richard. This will not end in the Oval Office. This is to make a point. And I said to myself, probably not, but I'm not so sure, but Bernie understood there was a need for, before he even decided to run, the first time I met him face to face, I had interviewed him, but first time I met him face to face was at a conference. He asked to meet me for breakfast, and There were 1,000 people in the room, and he said, "Let me ask you, if I were to decide to run for president, stand up if you would join me and help me, because I wouldn't be able to do it alone." And 1,000 people, everyone in the room stood up.
Wow.
And you could feel that moment, that electricity, right? It was like seeing the Beatles at Shea Stadium or something. It was like being in those big demonstrations of 1967 or 1968. And that's why I thought, to my colleagues, don't be so sure, that there isn't something here. And it was tremendously exciting. Of course, we saw an entire massive machinery go to work to make sure he did not become president then and in 2020 and in the years in between. But that's what I mean by, a moment characterized by fear and great possibility. I think of kids today, children today. I grew up in an era where nuclear war was a very real possibility, as you guys do, I'm sure, or as you guys did as children. And in my case, we were taught in elementary school, we had these drills where we had to practice to duck and cover, because they trained us if there was a nuclear attack somehow that was supposed to protect us from a nuclear bomb, flying glass or something. And so we had this constant electric fear of destruction. And now children have that from shootings or, who knows what else, land wars and other things, and constant threats of that in the Middle East and in, Ukraine, and civil wars in the U.S. looming and everything else. So, you have that darkness overlaying. You have the massive irreversible inequality, near irreversible inequality. You have ever increasing irreversible climate change, all the reasons why I've called my show The 0 Hour. So we have all these things. And we have the subversion of democracy in the United States and around the world, and, the hijacking of the United Nations by the United States. You know all that stuff. But on the other hand, we also have an awakening of a level that, frankly, I would have thought impossible 15, 20 years ago. So this is, as the writer Gramsci said, right? Pessimism of the intellect, optimism of the will. That, there's people have prevailed before under grim circumstances, and the fact that there are people like you guys out there doing what you do, and that there are millions of us, and more, I believe, every day, is a chance for tremendous hope, and it gives our lives meaning and purpose.
I mean, I certainly agree with you that there is a lot of pessimism going on. And you pointed out to, a lot of, whether we're talking about the Wall Street movement or then after that with Bernie. But however, when we look at it electorally, in that sense, do you think there is any hope, or does the hope really come from you, from the sense that, as you were just saying right now, there's all this awakening and a lot of people are perhaps politicized and really want something different, but it seems like electorally, at least, there doesn't seem to be anything, and some of these other movements aren't where they are. And we can come back to the Bernie Sanders election. I have definitely some more questions about that, his campaign. But yes, where do you think this optimism can go? How should it be directed then at the moment?
Well, look, this is why I quoted the, pessimism of the intellect. Because I think an intelligent person looking at things now has got to admit that it doesn't look all that good. Here in the United States, we have had, frankly, if you define the left as the Democratic Party, and I think that's a matter of debate, but yes. To the extent, you have a Democratic Party that has either not cared about winning or has not been very smart about it, or arguably both, but you have, on the other hand, you have a corporate right and fanatical Christianist far right that very much cares about winning and has for 50 years. then they've now completely captured the Supreme Court and many courts down the line, lower level courts. And we're rapidly headed towards a dictatorship of the judiciary that's going to be hard to overcome without completely taking over Congress with a very progressive Congress, which seems like that's far away because we have money controlling the electoral process altogether, and most of the Democratic Party, all of the any part of the Republican Party that isn't dominated by corporate interests is dominated by extremist interests. And, so it looks in the short term extremely grim, but optimism comes first of all because humans have prevailed against grim situations before, and because it's an unsustainable system. If you look at the arc of history over the long term, no system built on grotesque inequality, which is what we have, has ever survived for any period of time without collapsing on itself. And we layer onto that the fact that we're destroying the planet that the system exists on, and we're exhausting and depleting the resources that this inequality relies on and consumes, like the giant flying saucers in Independence Day. They just suck out all the resources of a planet and move on. They don't stay and try to live on it. That, when you look at that, kind of reality, this system can't last one way or another. And what that says in the long term, I guess if I'm brutally honest, which I have to be to myself every day, is it's going to collapse probably, unless we figure out a peaceful way to alter it, which looks like that would be tough. So one of two things is likely to happen. Either we do figure out a peaceful way to adjust it, or there is a very rough period of collapse and or downsizing, after which we either have some sense knocked into our global head that we have to do it better, and we do it better, or something even more grim, some kind of global totalitarianism comes in, and that doesn't work, and then we do it. We have to, but we have to think in the long term. We have to every day, in ways great and small, envision a kind of collaborative, collective, cooperative model for existing on the planet, so that when those moments of crisis come, we're, as a people, in the United States, if you're in the United States, everywhere in the world, we are people who have been thinking about this. And there are people everywhere who have been thinking about this, so that we can then come up with practical solutions.
So in a sense, it's just how grim it's looking right now that gives you hope that it can keep on going. And then really what is required is to have some kind of a apparatus in place that when the time comes in, you can kind of react and maybe get something better out of the system.
Yes, I think so. And I would have preferred a smoother track for humanity than one that involves the suffering we see today, the suffering we'll see tomorrow, the suffering we'll see, but it looks like that's the way it's going to be. The writer, Rebecca Solnit, who, SOLNIT, who I've always appreciated. I've actually appreciated her ideas more than as a writer than her prose, because as a writer myself, I concentrate on both things, but her ideas I've generally really liked. She was kind of a Hillary person, but nobody's perfect, but she had an interesting idea for a book called A Paradise Built in Hell, I think it was called, years ago. And the theme of her book was that she picked, I think, 4 major catastrophes. I know the Bhopal disaster in India was one of them. I think another was maybe a bus crash where many children were killed in a small community. And then there was a hurricane, and I can't remember the 4th anyway, maybe a big fire or something. But she picked these 4 big disasters. And what she found, I remember Bhopal, I think something like 68,000 people died, and it was horrific. And what she found was that, and the reason why she called the book what she did was that people, despite the tragedy, or maybe because of the horror they went through, they found a sense, their lives developed a sense of purpose. And because they had to work together to rebuild everything they lost. And in doing that, they found meaning in their lives, and in a way that helped to redeem their suffering. And, it was a really interesting insight. And I think about, I lived in New York City. I just moved out before 9/11 happened. Mm-hmm. And in fact, I knew people who died in 9/11. I had a pass to one of the buildings, World Trade Center 1. And it was, extremely shocking for us. I would have been there if we had not. My wife was at a meeting there that day. And I still remember going, we had just moved to New Jersey. I still remember going in like a week later and, saying to like a hot dog vendor on the street, uptown, how are you doing? How are you doing? There was this kind of like, there was this
solidarity.
Yes.
Solidarity is the right word. And so I think it may be that more and more as we step into whatever difficulties we're going to continue to see. Look around, man, right? The hurricanes, the fires out west, the Hurricane Sandy in New York, floods in the subways, never seen, 100-year thing, and it's going to start to become more and more common. All around the world, we're going to be seeing this. And, Sam, you're in Tehran, you guys were like out in the street for us after 9/11. And, the governments, our government certainly moved really quickly to hide that. But, I think globally and within countries, I think we'll see more and more, as we see more and more tragedies like this, I think we'll see more and more solidarity like that. That's my prayer, my hope. Mm. And this is how we'll start to get over it. I hope. Yeah, that's I'm done.
I hope so too. And it just kind of made me think, well, right now there's also the problem of inflation that is on top of everything. And that might be even a faster push than anything else, really, given how badly it affects people. So there is that too. And then you also just mentioned quickly the progressive and Democrats, and this wasn't in the questions, and before moving on to Biden, I just want to ask you, did the squad ever give you any hope at any time or anything like that? Or did they disappoint from the very beginning in a way?
No, they did give me hope at certain points. I certainly enjoyed them and was glad they were around. And, my favorite moment with AOC was when she was really kind of, as I understand it, chosen by the Democratic Socialists of America. Like, that's a complicated story, but by DSA to run. And at one point when she was debating Joe Crowley, who was the establishment Democrat she was running against, he kind of tried to trick her because he never thought she had a chance. So he said, well, if you win, I'll campaign for you. If I win, will you campaign for me? And she said, well, I'm part of a movement, so I have to consult with the movement before I answer that question. And I thought, well, that's good, because thinking like a movement, thinking collectively, that's the wave of the future.
Certainly.
But so I thought, this is how we have to be, right? But a lot of things about AOC, about the other members of the squad, I like a lot. And the squad is growing. And, that encouraged me too. And there are certain individual things they've said that I like a lot. I think they walk a line between being progressives, a word I understand less and less every day in terms of what it means, but they walk a line between being progressives and being Democrats. And I think sometimes they walk it pretty well. I think sometimes they walk it less well. I think there's got to be more of the fear factor that they've got to be more willing to frighten the Democrats than they are right now. They've got to be more willing to threaten the Democrats and maybe force the establishment Democrats to accept a loss or two to show that their threats are real. So in that sense, they've disappointed me. But the one that I've known best, the one that I've met and been on a panel with and worked with a little bit is Ilhan Omar. And I happen to think the world of her. I think she's, an amazing human being, very special kind of person, and, special qualities. But I also know or sense that she especially, but a lot of the members of the squad are just under the most god-awful pressure, just god-awful from every side, from the death threats, her especially because she's a Muslim, but the death threats and the pressure from the establishment Democrats and the hatred from the Republicans and the mistreatment by the media and all that. So I feel sorry for, I empathize with the squad and I admire them for their courage. But, if I could give them words of encouragement, it would be, don't be afraid to get a little bit tougher with with Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and, accept their disapproval, because it's a long game you've got to play, and you may be even lonelier for a while if you want to get done what you want to get done.
No, certainly agree with you. And Ilhan Omar, really, she sticks her neck out more than the others, I feel. I mean, even if it's sometimes to make a comment, just put out a statement more than the other ones. Definitely agree with you there. And also, yes, if they were perhaps a bit tougher, because sometimes I joke with Sam, and I mean, I understand being a senator or where you fall on the issue, your vote and stuff can mean much more. But it seems like whenever the other side was Republican or Democrats, they want to stop something, just one of their votes seems to bring everything down. But the squad, you add two of them plus another two, and all of them together, they still argue that, their votes won't even achieve anything good. In fact, it might be counterproductive. So there's always that dilemma, it seems, from far too. Of course, you have to look closer on who exactly we're talking about. But
yeah, and I mean, if you're Joe Manchin or Kristen Sinema as well, we've got to deal with them or we won't get our bill passed. But if you're Bernie Sanders in the Senate, then it's, Bernie, you have to fall in line to get this passed. You have to give in. And if I had one, major criticism of my former boss, it would be, you don't actually. And maybe in the long run, but Bernie's just too good a guy and too much of a team player. Maybe in the long run, if you're Rashida Tlaib or anyone else, maybe you need to let a few bills fail. Maybe you need to be as hated as Joe Manchin is sometimes hated for a year so that they finally understand they have to take you seriously. If Joe Biden can kill Build Back Better, maybe you have to kill something this year so that they know they have to put in what you want in, or they're not going to get anything done. Otherwise, the progressive wing will always stay what it is, which is the weak wing. And of course, one of the reasons they give in is that they accept a Democratic Party culture that says that the only responsible thing for progressives to do is surrender and accept whatever the party tells them to accept. And I don't go along with that. I mean, leftists who say they don't want to vote for the Democrats are more hated by Democrats than right-wingers who say they want to vote for Donald Trump. It seems to me the biggest hatred is a Democrat, mainstream Democrat, will hate Jill Stein voter or more than they'll hate a Donald Trump voter, which to me is insane. If you hate people who vote for Jill Stein, why don't you offer policies that will attract them? And believe me, I've had arguments like this with very, very progressive Democratic senators and congressmen in private, where I've said, instead of judging them, why don't you draw them in? Why do you scold them when you meet them? Why don't you just say, I understand, here's what I want to do.
Is it their donors that really get in their way? Oh, sorry, sir.
No, yeah. Do they have any specific common answer or yeah? I mean, they never come out and say it's donors. I wouldn't think, but
They can't say it's their donors, and it's not just their donors though. That's the interesting part. That's part of it, of course, but in my experience with them, it's a culture thing. It's really they've internalized this idea that, well, no, this is what responsible people do. So it's kind of, when they talk about the professional managerial class and that psychology, which is what the Democratic Party, I think, to a large extent has become. It's like, no, responsible people accept that you create limits on certain universal benefits, for example. I'm just picking, and that you just say, no, free higher education is not made available to anyone whose family makes more than X amount per year, which was never a thing for high school education or primary school education. Why should it apply? Yeah. Why is that the response? It's totally right. It's inconsistent. It makes no sense. But no, this is the professional, it's a meritocracy or, all these ideas that they have. It becomes very internalized. And one of the things that astonished me working for Bernie was that it wasn't just, well, our donors won't let us do this. It was the level of that when you challenge them on these ideas, they get so angry and resentful. Yes. I mean, some of these people, good liberals, quote unquote, hate Bernie, and they hated anybody who worked for Bernie. I mean, it was really funny. I met James Carville, a longtime Clinton.
Oh, yeah.
I met him on a train once going from New York to Washington. And I knew he wouldn't like this, but I did it anyway. I walked up to him and I said, hello, James. I wanted to introduce myself. I work in politics too. I'm Richard Eskow. And he said, how you doing? And I said, great. I work for Bernie Sanders. And his entire expression changed. He said, well, everybody's got to work for somebody, I guess. And I said, well, ain't that the truth? And, he just shut down. They just hate anybody. But of course, they would steal our ideas left and right, for Hillary. We'd come up, or Bernie would come up with a good line and she'd use it 2 weeks later. So,
So they've really, but that makes sense. And you can see that in other professions and walks of life. I guess they've internalized it. And at the same time, it's become personal for them. So that goes on top of other kind of pressures. And then I guess let's talk about the president a bit, about Joe Biden. What do you make of it so far? I mean, his presidency kind of seemed like once his domestic agenda didn't really pass the way it was supposed to, it was kind of in a way felt like the end of his, that was everything he had promised, right? He hadn't promised too much beyond that. So once that failed, it kind of seemed like it was the end of his for his presidential period in a way.
Yeah, do you think there is any hope of Democrats being able to do anything by midterms or?
Oh boy.
Not prediction, but just guess.
Well, my late mother used to say when she wasn't impressed with somebody, she used to say, he's not exactly a ball of fire, is he?
And he isn't.
Good old Joe. He's not exactly a ball of fire. He, look, Biden was, I don't want to be unkind because he seems like a nice old fella, but he was kind of a has-been when Obama picked him for vice president in 2008. And as a friend of mine was reminding me the other day, he got picked because Biden made this foolish sort of statement that was caught on a recording of saying that like white working people just want to cling to God, guts, and guns, or something like that, or the Bible, God and guns, or something like that. And so he insulted, white, everybody, but particularly white, blue collar people who never went past high school and were religious. So he got in so much trouble that he had to pick this like Catholic working class, senator from Scranton, Pennsylvania, as his running mate. So old Joe got lucky, and then he was kind of old then, and so he became the running mate, and he kind of put his foot in the mouth. He'd known for that for decades, and as vice president, he did that a few times, and he was just the last. The Democrats, aside from Bernie and, arguably Warren in some ways, did not exactly field a stellar cast of candidates in 2020 and as in the primaries. And Joe was kind of the last mediocre alternative to Bernie left standing, right? I mean, Kamala Harris was so bad she had to drop out before the first vote with less than 3% support. And, voters did not like Elizabeth Warren, who was the most progressive second to Bernie. And, Pete Buttigieg is a moron and, empty suit. And, there wasn't really anybody left out of the, all those faceless, figures. And so Joe, they kind of had to rig the game for Joe. So they did. And he's their guy, and they kind of propped him up and rolled him over the finish line. And as I say, yeah, pretty much. And as I say, I've heard nice stories about him as a human being. I have, even though he's kind of a corrupt old school Democrat, I have a little bit of affection for those old, crooked geezers as being like, folk characters, guys you meet at the Veterans of Foreign Wars Club or whatever, they're just, but I don't want them particularly running the country. But to his credit, he made a terrible choice in Kamala Harris because people don't like her as a politician. It's going to be a catastrophe if he has to step down. But to his credit, or his advisor's credit, he read the moment in the sense that he knew, he ran in opposition to Medicare for All, which is a disaster. We've lost 1 million people now to COVID-19, at least a third of them as a direct result of not having Medicare for All. But he semi-read, they knew they didn't have a chance unless they tried to do big things. And so there's a giant ant on my camera. That's unpleasant. Okay. He knew they were not going to win unless they tried to do something for the people who had been struggling through this pandemic. So they did the Build Back Better. But this guy whose whole claim to fame or his whole reason for running was that he was a master of the Senate, couldn't get it passed. So, and they screwed the progressives. There was a strategy. The progressives agreed to play the strategy with him, which is hold the infrastructure bill, which the Republicans wanted, hold it until the full bill got passed. The progressives played that game for him. He double-crossed the progressives, separated the two bills, did it the Republicans' way. The infrastructure bill got passed. The Republicans in Manchin got what they wanted. His bigger bill got tanked. Everybody blamed the progressives. So he totally flubbed it. He's not going to get much of any, I don't know, maybe get a little something symbolic, but he, I don't see him pulling off much of anything between, maybe something because they realize how desperate the moment is, but I don't see anything preventing this from being an absolute crushing defeat in November, unless something happens that is completely unexpected, like they get so terrified that they actually pass something that helps people. At this point, I can't even see that would help them that much, but
like
maybe
legislating like abortion rights or something like that. Do you think that would?
I think they've already tried and failed on that. I think that, and so ridiculous that they say they're going to do that. Well, they've had 50 years to do that, and they didn't. And then Nancy Pelosi and these others go out to reelect in a primary a congressman who's anti-abortion rights. So
pro-gun.
Yeah, and anti-gun control. So they're more interested in crushing progressives in the party than they are in passing the agenda they supposedly care about. So, but even if they did something, child and family leave, I can't see that really helping them, and I can't see them doing it, but who knows? I don't see this January 6th commission changing the equation at all. So
everybody's glued to TV, I think, all across the world. Everybody's just watching that 24/7. No, you haven't seen it.
Sarcastic, right?
Yeah.
The shame about it is, some of the information is important and useful, but they hired some TV producer to make it dramatic, quote unquote. But they forgot the first rule of drama. Sam, I hear you love movies. I love movies. I actually worked for Francis Coppola when I was young, but
wow.
My brother's a screenwriter. But rule number one is suspense, right? You're not supposed to know how the thing turns out. Right? It's like you've already done the big reveal. Trump did it. It's like, so no, why would anyone watch? We know you think Trump did it. So,
it's an art house movie. It's like reverse French movies, they show the
right. Yeah, exactly. But it's not exactly a new wave. There's no reveals in it at all, number one. And number two, and there could be, there could be dramatic reveals, but they haven't put any in. And number two, it gets to a really important point, which is they're elevating their ideological enemies, like supposed ideological enemies, Liz Cheney. And the fact is, yes, some of the revelations are important, but the whole theme of it is democracy is in peril. Mm-hmm. And the rest of the planet and the rest of the country that is not a professional Democrat by ideology or income is saying, what democracy? We haven't had democracy for at least 75 years. Haven't you read the studies that show that the views of the oligarchy and large campaign contributors have been driving government decisions for at least 40 years? Chris Hedges had a good column about this, but it's kind of like obvious in a way. It's like, why are you calling this democracy? 67% of the public thinks that women should have reproductive choice, and they're not going to have it. And you say you're defending democracy. 80% of the public wants, 90% of the public wants background checks on guns, and we're not going to have it. And you say you're defending democracy. Large majority of the public thinks we spend too much on defense, so-called, and we just voted to spend more. And you say, I could go on and on. It's like, what are you talking about? Defending democracy? The whole premise is just not interesting to people. And this is the part they're missing. Does that make sense to you guys?
No, because certainly. I myself haven't watched 1 minute of these January 6th, whatever is going on. And, we come on YouTube a few times per week and talk about stuff. So, I would love to watch it. There was something interesting to get on and talk about. But it's one of those all the time on mainstream TV and everything. A lot of the things that they're showing are just shows. But this one really seems to be one of the bigger ones. Of course, something interesting could come out of it, but certainly what you're saying.
I also want to I don't know if you know the book Who Rules America by William Domhoff, but it's a big book updated like every 10 years or something. And it's like regularly shows that, yeah, it's elites basically in America at least, or everywhere. But yeah, it's just, yeah, it's very like exactly everybody knows this. There's been like academic work on it since 1970s. So
yeah, and the Princeton paper by Benjamin Page and Martin Gillens is really good. I'm blanking on the name of it now, but it's they don't use the word oligarchy, but other people have in defense of their work. Also showing the same thing. And Thomas Ferguson, political scientist, does a lot on the role of money in elections, and he clearly showed that in no way was the Trump victory in 2016 an upset, that a last minute flow of dark money in the last week completely drove the thing. So, defending democracy, are you out of your mind? You know what I mean? That's your theme.
Too late.
I mean, if your theme was fascism, that's a real theme. And I think that would attract viewers because it's like we're used to like Nazis being the bad guys, right? We've been watching them for 75, 80 years. It's like if you were like, oh, these scary Nazis, do a TV movie on the, what was he called? They called him the QAnon shaman, make it about him.
Oh, yeah.
He's interesting, yeah, so that's what we're up against. There's a movie in here, but they're not making it.
No, certainly. And so in 2020, so in this election, were you kind of kicking and screaming yourself that at least Bernie wouldn't go a little bit harder after Joe Biden and him completely refusing? But I mean, even people who, and one of the reasons Bernie was saying is that you're close friends with Biden and he knows Biden, and Biden for some reason isn't the most I can't hate him as much as other politicians, even me, and you were saying the same. So he kind of has that. I don't know if that's what got him by, but yes, were you just trying to wish that Bernie would at least change his strategy a bit there?
During the election, you mean? Or
yes,
after?
The 2020 election, yes.
I got it that, first of all, I was aware that Bernie genuinely likes Biden a lot.
Okay.
And Biden likes Bernie. I mean, I was aware of that as well, too. There's a genuine affection between those two because Biden is I can't go too much into it, but just in the interest of time, but Biden is a genuinely likable guy. I mean, he
seems like a nice guy.
He seems so.
He
like,
is.
Grandpa, maybe you don't want him to talk about certain issues, but like, you won't hate him. I don't know. That's the vibe I get. Like, I wouldn't want
absolutely.
my friends.
On a personal level, completely nice, which is totally bizarre when you think about something like his nastiness about Medicare for all, because it's like this nice, I mean, like I'm the one who talk about old, but this nice old guy is like killing 60,000 people a year by opposing Medicare for all. So he's like a mass murderer, but he's also like a genuinely nice guy who's just like misguided, right? So it's really hard to dislike him so that was part of what was driving Bernie, I think. But I do think that he lost some effectiveness by being so nice about him, because I think Bernie's role now and during the election, and the role of anybody who thinks like Bernie, like me, like you guys, probably whatever, is, if you're gonna say you made the call, and I don't know where you guys are at with this, but like if you're going to say like I did, like Bernie did, like I really want to defeat Trump, and so I'm going to say you should vote for Bernie. I mean, you should vote for Biden, but if you can't bring yourself to vote for Biden, at least don't vote for Trump. Obviously, if you're going to say that, it to people that you genuinely respect, right? Because you got to respect people or you won't convince them. Then you've got to say, look, I know Biden is bad about this and he's bad about that. And I know he's old and he's losing it. I mean, you got to be real. And if you're going to be real about it, you got to say all those things but all those things considered. And I know you know that. And I know your objections to voting for Biden are real and legitimate. And I respect them. But respectfully, and I'll respect any decision you make, but respectfully, I would say to you, here's the reasons to vote for him anyway. And And that's more or less what I did. And I got a lot of crap for it, as you might expect, but that's okay. You know, you don't have to agree with me, but Bernie didn't do that very much. And I think he would have been more effective if he had, but I think he couldn't bring himself to do that because of his affection for Biden. And, you know, maybe he would have swayed a few more people. But, you know, on the other hand, he also worked really hard for Hillary Clinton. He couldn't bring himself to say as nice things about Hillary Clinton because she's a horrible person, and because she kicked him in the every chance she got, including after he like worked night and day to get her elected, flying to 3 cities a day for however many months, exhausting himself. She said he didn't work hard enough for me. So why should he say, you know, but Biden, you know, is a decent guy to him, so he couldn't do it. And after Biden was elected, though, I think in particular, I would fault Bernie for not leaning on him harder. I mean, and the whole left. I mean, you have Pramila Jayapal, who I've always respected a lot. She's been on my show a couple of times, head of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, saying, I give Biden an A+ about 6 months into his presidency. And it's like, an A+ is literally as good as a human being can do. So if you give him an A+, why do you have a Congressional Progressive Caucus? You don't need to even exist because the president is perfect. So disband your caucus. You no longer have a purpose. And that was a horrible mistake because he was far from perfect. An A+ for the Congressional Progressive Caucus should mean you're fighting for Medicare for all. You're fighting to cut the military budget by at least 10%, hopefully 50%. I mean, we could go down the list. But so I think the progressives made a lot of bad mistakes in the first year of the Biden presidency. And I hope they've learned. And, and it's easy for me to say, obviously, because I'm not out there dealing with these people every day and getting the flack from every direction. But on the other hand, you know, the job of people like us is not to be those people, but to be, it's a whole ecosystem, right? And the people in there do what they do, but we have a role too, and that's to critique and offer a different perspective. Mine happens to be that they need to be stronger and more militant, if you will, about, accepting that perspective, that left perspective is the more moral, humane, legitimate perspective, and it demands a voice at the table.
No, certainly agree. I think that's a very fair assessment. Go ahead, Sam.
Yeah, no, just because we just talk about Pramila Jayapal and like the role of media towards the elected politicians, I thought I'd bring up the question that we wrote that you recently did an interview with Matt Duss, who was a foreign policy advisor, I believe, to Bernie Sanders. And it was mostly about the Ukraine. And maybe we can put the Pramila Jayapal. Don't you think sometimes you are being a bit too lenient on these people? Because it does feel like, especially with the separation of the Build Back Better and the infrastructure bill, or with Matt Duss writing that article about Ukraine, I don't know who was the target of that article, except potential future employers, to be honest. Does left has any power in who's on the left that is stopping Ukraine being helped even more? So I just feel like, do you feel like sometimes perhaps media is too lenient? Because genuinely, people on the left tend to be, they don't want to be very mean. I feel like they're nicer people. So it's just, I don't know.
Well, it's a great question, Sam, because, and for me personally, it involves multiple issues, right? One of the issues is tactical. One of them is just personality, okay? Because I've brawled with people on left and right. I've been on Tucker Carlson's show. I've been on, but this was many years ago. I've been on Sean Hannity's show and so on. I vowed I would never do it again, just not because I didn't do reasonably well or very well, but because I just didn't like the feeling, and I'm kind of, I don't like the adrenaline that sticks with you for 48 hours or, but also I'm, a nice guy. But the Matt Duss thing was interesting to me because it was a lot of things were going on in my head. The other thing is, I've had Matt Taibbi on. Now, I didn't know Matt Duss before. Matt Taibbi, who you probably know, really well-known writer, was very good on the financial stuff. Is a good friend of mine, but sometimes kind of takes positions on cancel culture and things so-called that people think are pretty neoconservative and so on. I debated him. I had him on the show. We had a debate about the leftist philosopher Herbert Marcuse.
Oh yes, the Marcuse one. We've seen that one. I was gonna put a question about Marcuse, but then it became too much. So
yeah, and I think I was too nice to Taibbi too, and I think he acknowledged.
Maybe, yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I think that's just my personality. But with the Matt Duss thing, it's interesting. I have been phenomenally disappointed with Bernie, with the entire left, all of them, the squad, every single progressive in Congress, with no exception that I can think of, about Ukraine and about foreign policy. I think while they've been pretty good on Yemen, on calling for disengagement with the Saudi, our role in the, excuse me, I'm going to kill that damn ant. Enough is enough. With disengagement with our role, our complicity in the Saudi atrocities in Yemen, they've gone along with our in my view our role in egging on the Ukrainians as sacrificial lambs to our desire to weaken the Russians militarily. By when Zelensky, when that war, I don't want to get on a huge sidetrack, but when that war began, Zelensky asked for a negotiating ability and military aid. Well, we were more than happy to give him military aid. We imposed these sanctions. It gave Zelensky no ability to negotiate over the sanctions. So finally, he stopped asking for negotiations. He just said, okay, give me all the military aid I can get. And by the way, I'm the only one commenting on that who literally qualifies for Ukrainian citizenship because
really?
my grandparents were born in Ukraine. But not a single, and there are a lot of really smart people. I've had them on my show, some of them talking about how we need a more balanced and measured approach in the U.S. that emphasizes negotiations because Ukraine is not going to overthrow Putin. Ukraine is not going to military conquer Russia. It's going to end in negotiation one way or another. There's questions how many deaths in between. Not a single progressive in Congress has stood up on this, including Bernie. And then, as you said, Matt Duss wrote a piece that Bernie's foreign policy advisor that seemed to be more like a job application than a serious piece on what to do about Ukraine. So I went through this thought process and said, well, I started to sit down and really eviscerate him in print. And then I thought, well, we're both Bernie people. We're kind of, comrades and Team Bernie. Maybe I'll have him on the show first. And it was like I had him on the show and I thought, well, he's like a nice, in Yiddish, they say nebbishy, guy, meaning, sort of, he's not like, he's like academic, bookish. And I thought,
it felt like just he was saying that let's just be, more reasonable or something along, like it felt like a nothing burger, his argument on. I hope I'm
right. And every time I said, but don't you think we should blah, blah, blah? He said, yes, we should do that too. It's like,
yeah, exactly.
Okay. All right. Well, we disagree. Okay. You agree with what I say. I don't agree with what you say. Okay. But, should I have been tougher on him? I was like, maybe it's like maybe I should have been tougher. Ben Burgess is a philosopher. He's a friend of mine. He writes for Jacobin a lot, and he actually did a 2-hour program about my 1-hour debate with Matt Taibbi about Herbert Marcuse. Ben had other philosophers on it.
Yes, I remember that last year.
So I went on with Ben to talk about it. And I was like, man, I'm not a philosopher. I don't have a PhD in philosophy. That was not the point. But there were a couple points I could have crushed Taibbi on that. On like said, that was anti-Semitic, and I didn't, right? I kind of hinted at it and he knew where I was going, and I was like, but I'll let you go. And but I'm just not that guy, right? I'm not Bill Maher. I'm not Tucker Carlson. I'm not Sean Hannity. It's just like.
Well, would you like to take a chance now to? What was the stuff about Marcuse? We did a small series about Frankfurt School on YouTube. So
you guys did?
Yeah. It's still ongoing. I think we have 2 episodes more to broadcast. But yeah, what was I don't know. It was, do you anything especially remember that you wanted to say? Maybe you missed or.
And I mean, just one thing that I remember is that Matt's approach was that he went off one book, I believe, The Critique of Tolerance, one of his viewers had suggested, and he kind of went for that book, but he made very general statements about Marcuse, if I remember correctly. So I remember some of those you were already kind of having issues with it, the way he had framed it.
Well, it was more, where I went easy with him was more about Marcuse's identity. As an immigrant
thing and everything.
Right, like you said, I'll bet he never went to a baseball game, cracked open a bottle or a can of
beer,
black label beer and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, really? And so he wasn't really American in that sense. I was like, really, man, most Jewish immigrants to the United States, I'm going to guess, never went to a Pittsburgh Phillies game and cracked. Are you suggesting that Jewish immigrants aren't really American? Because I wouldn't go there, okay? Because that kind of sounds anti-Semitic, brother. It kind of sounds like, wow, okay.
Like Native Americans probably didn't, I would imagine.
Right, I would imagine they're not out there in North Dakota or Wyoming.
In baseball,
Right. But he knew what I was saying. In fact, he said I shouldn't have wrote that, which is okay, once somebody says I shouldn't have wrote that, okay, we made the point. But look, in terms of Marcuse in general, he's a fascinating case of a brilliant thinker, kind of, in my view, embedded in amber in terms of, he's in the amber of his time, his moment, his cultural and historical moment. That's how I view him. His emphasis on the non-economic, non-political, the cultural, sexual, etc. I could say it doesn't age well, and I kind of be right, but it's not so much that it doesn't age well, is that it's almost like an artifact. Do you know what I'm trying to say?
Yes. I mean, I think if I understand you correctly, everyone in a way is a product of their time or very much influenced by their time, but him, it was just so specific and period, everything that happened to him from when he left Germany and then the post-War II situation, how unique that was and all this. So I think that's what you're trying to say, right? I mean, the moments were just so big during that time, it just influenced them perhaps than other people are influenced by their moment and their surroundings.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think one of my great takeaways, not that I'm a Marcuse expert by any means, but one of my great takeaways about Marcuse is less what he thinks than how he thinks. The way that he synthesizes his moment, to me, is of greater interest at times than specifically the product of that synthesis process. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. Actually, I would even Marcuse, both, I mean, all the Frankfurt School, I think, but Marcuse especially, he's much better than his followers, I think. His followers are I don't like, they seem much more hardcore and extremist than he was, I feel.
Yeah, no, I think that's right, because I think that dovetails with what I'm saying, because I think there was a fluidity about his thinking, and there's a rigidity to his followers. And I think what I'm admiring is his fluidity, and what you're rejecting, and I also reject, is the rigidity. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So
I stole Camir's time for questions. So.
No, not at all, not at all. Thank you, Richard, for being so kind with your time. So I just want to ask one final question about Bernie, and then I think Sam can ask about movies. So again, just how magical was that 2016 period? Perhaps when did it hit the campaign that, wow, we are kind of perhaps overachieving? And did that spoil us a little bit? Because, and sorry, another question, have you ever seen anything like that, any other political moment that was like that? And did it spoil us a bit in the sense that, out of nowhere, it seemed like we're going to have this great, amazing socialist go straight to the White House as the president without, having a party that represents similar candidates or other candidates in other major races? So that's short, did it kind of spoil us?
Oh, well, let's see where to start. Occupy was almost a practice run for that to me, because I still remember Occupy began, and I think it was September of 2011. In July of 2011, I wrote a kind of where is the big movement thing. I wrote this kind of think piece of where is the big movement? What is happening? Why aren't we synthesizing all this into something that makes it all explode? And then Occupy began, and it just, in a matter of moments, it seemed, exploded. And the same people who told me Bernie was never going to happen said, well, this is ridiculous. They don't have an agenda. They don't have a set of demands. They're just supposedly just one big demand, but they don't know what it is, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, same thing I was saying, no, this has got something, right? There's something to this. And then I remember at a political conference, somebody introduced 10 people and said, hello, movement participants, meet your movement leaders. And I was like, wait a minute, we didn't elect them. This thing is dead. It's over. But of course, there was a systematic destruction of it. Of Occupy, really systematic, and that's a whole other. But so we knew it could germinate. We knew it could be crushed. We had that in that sort of that ontogeny. We had a glimpse of it, and I remember going on Fox News and being in the green room and sitting around with Greta Van Susteren and all these people. And somebody said, what are you here? And I was in my suit and everything. What are you here to talk about? And I said, the Occupy movement. And everybody glared at me. And I said, I like them. And Greta Van Susteren said, you know what I like? Freedom of speech. And I said, me too. And but
original Me Too movement.
That was before Me Too.
Yeah.
And then Michelle Bachmann came in looking like she was on the strongest medication you could have ever. And she was pinned. Wow. Her eyes were pinned. But then Bernie came along, and it was unimaginably exciting. I mean, it was like the Beatles at Shea Stadium level of exciting, and but stressful. And I remember about 3 weeks after it started, Bernie demanded to take me out to dinner so that he could rebuke me about something completely unfair. And we went to the elevator, and I thought he was going to have a stroke. His face was very red. And I said, how are you doing? And he said, to be honest, it's a lot of stress. And I, but he adapted very quickly, just kind of somehow inner something adapted to it. But it was, I remember we went to Phoenix, and he had a big rally there. He was just starting to get big rallies, 11, 20, 30,000 people. And they had these pedicabs to get around town. And this old guy had a pedicab, and it had a bumper sticker that said, Bernie fucking Sanders was the, and I thought, all right, this is the moment, right? This is happening. And so that was unbelievable. And being in New Hampshire when he won, by 20 points. And,
No.
but, he had said, this will probably not end in the White House and, or behind the Oval Office desk. That's what he had said to me, to get that quote correctly. And, so it was never a sure thing. It was a wonderful moment, but translating that into a lasting movement was always going to be a challenge. I think in retrospect, it lasted more than I thought it might. That rather than being disappointed, that it actually, well, it could have been much more. There's actually been more resonance, more continuance than I expected there.
It lasted at least until 2020, I think.
Yeah.
You can say.
And it did reshape to a certain extent what the Democratic Party tried to do, although I never had deep hope in that. And now I think we're all kind of look, we had COVID, it changed everything. We had, we're totally lost at sea because, Biden getting elected, at least with Trump, we were in a state of opposition, although that was confusing. But, we're kind of like, we've been in a null state ever since COVID, and then Biden coming in, and the left movement has been really adrift. And I think now, whatever happens in November 2022, we've got to find our feet again and get out of this null state. But I think there's a lot of potentiality left there, more than I've ever seen in my lifetime, more than I think there's been in 50, 60 years. I think we just have to orient again. And then I think, God willing, we'll be onto something, or whomever willing, we'll be onto something.
Certainly, hopefully. And one small comment. I find it very interesting that you link it a lot anytime I ask about Bernie Sanders to the Wall Street movement. It's kind of a movement I haven't thought about much, and you don't often hear people bringing it up as much today. So that's very interesting. Sam, I don't know if you want to go with the last question or if you had any follow-up questions.
I was going to ask you about film recommendation, because you talk about movies a lot and stuff, but I didn't know you worked with Francis Ford Coppola. So if you, I don't know, whichever you like to talk about, that's really, I didn't know that. That's really cool. That's awesome.
I mean, this was, I want to say, very early 80s. So I was a very junior employee. So I only met him a couple times. In San Francisco, he had a post-production studio. And he really wanted to think of it as a community of filmmakers. He was a very innovative thinker at the time. And he was trying new technologies. And I was assistant to the general manager, which is combination kind of secretarial and everything else. And I managed the recording studio because I was a musician, and it was just a great disorganized job for a guy who couldn't manage, an organization at all. So I got laid off pretty quickly, but it was great while it lasted. And, he was a visionary and also out of his mind. So, I was there when he released his movie, One from the Heart, which didn't have a coherent ending. And so all the reporters were saying, this movie doesn't make sense. It doesn't have an ending. And he said, how do you think it should end? Which they trashed him for, but it was actually in a way kind of an innovative way to respond. Okay, how do you think? I mean, I kind of admired him. I could see how people found him maddening, but I thought he was highly flawed, but really interesting, and had a really smart mind, and loved gathering smart people around him. And just, he saw the future, though. He was trying to invent with laser discs and computers what they do now with Final Cut, with iMovie and everything else. He was really trying to create digital editing and everything else at a time when it was technically impossible to do so. But he really saw what the future was. He just didn't have the wherewithal because the technology didn't exist. So he didn't have the wherewithal to do so. But he was kind of a visionary in that way.
That must have been great. Any movie recommendations, maybe recently, anything you've seen you like, or from old times, from nowadays, whatever?
Yeah, I haven't gone out to the theater much, which to me is the only legit way to see movies. I'm old school that way, but I still think some of the movies that don't like answer the moral questions for you are the great ones. Like Battle of Algiers to me is still a classic that way. It's interesting. I rewatched it recently, and I always thought it was like pro-revolutionary, but it's not really. It's like it's morally ambiguous. It seems cinema verite, but it's not. And oh gosh,
it's quite exciting. It's not boring as well, I would say, for an old film.
No. Not at all. But I mean, God, I could, I feel like on the spot now, but
sorry.
Oh no problem.
I actually thought, on a totally different category, the original version of what was the horror movie, Let the Right One In, the Swedish movie.
Swedish one.
Yeah, was really effective. I went through a period, I was ill a little while ago, and I went through a period of watching nothing but low budget jinn horror movies, like Turkish and Indonesian.
Oh yeah,
the lowest quality,
budgeted.
Yeah, but the Indonesian ones were like too good quality. They like put too much actual theatrical skill into it. There are actually some good Indonesian directors out there, really good for crime. And I don't know if you've seen any Indonesian movies, and of course I love Hong Kong stuff. I love the great, like Johnny Woo and people like that. I don't know if you've ever seen that stuff.
Johnny, the director.
Johnny To. Johnny To.
Oh, sorry, John. I thought you mean John Woo. Was that John Woo, the guy who he made Hard Boiled, I think, or something?
Johnny To.
Hong Kong cinema is amazing. The crime movies are. Internal Affairs, Departed was first. I don't know if you've seen that. Departed.
I have. Yeah. And I liked Internal Affairs better.
Yeah, it was. Well, I think so. Although Jack Nicholson, so yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was a little over the top, but obviously great. Obviously great. And I don't know. It gets, sometimes it takes me a little while to get started, but then I get totally into it. Now, obviously, they're making some great TV now too, but movies are still. So I thought Francis's daughter, Sophia, I thought Lost in Translation was very good. I thought, trying to remember what else she's made, but what have you seen that you like?
Oh, I like to be honest, I like indie American sort of low budget. I'm trying to think. Recently, the new Batman, I know it's superhero, but that was actually surprisingly good. It was kind of like a 70s Sidney Lumet style of sort of thing. So I enjoyed that, but nothing really. These
TV show, The Boys, shows. Really? We've talked about that. The Boys,
that's. I think recently. You might like that. That's
the series.
Social. Yeah, it's very socially aware, I guess. The heavy social commentary. It has
The Boys.
Yes,
The Boys.
An Amazon show, though.
So I started to watch it, and it just felt so negative to me that I couldn't.
It is, yeah. It's a bit. Yeah, maybe Matt Taibbi would like that a bit more, but
I think Matt might like it more than I do. Yeah. But I was impressed with it. But there's a lot of good stuff out there, though. Really good.
Yeah.
And TV, they are making some great TV right now. So.
Yes, it's just amazing. Need to catch something. Yeah,
Prep me for next time, and I'll have some good movie recommendations.
Next time we just do a movie talk, hopefully.
Yeah, that'd be great.
That sounds good. Well, Richard, thank you so much for being so kind and generous with your time. It was
my
absolutely
pleasure.
Fun. Thank you very much. And yes, thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe and leave any comments, questions, criticism down below. Make sure you get to them. Thank you.